work done today during the last part of class. But one thing I did notice is some of you still had like whatever the layer color of the diagrid. That was like your rendered output, right? Like it might be like chartreuse or something, again that's made to be sort of high contrast as a modeling aid when you're just sort of modeling things, looking at them wireframe or shaded view, but not necessarily a material proposition when it comes to rendering these things out. It's very accidental, in fact, right? Whatever layer color that thing was, right? So I saw a lot of chartreuse or red or magenta, sort of looking, layer color looking digrids in some cases. So I wanted to quickly show you guys some things to remember between Revit, Rhino, and Photoshop, just to sort of help out here a bit. Let me just open up this one. But we can, again, set materials and shaders inside of Revit or inside of Rhino, depending on which method of choice you have. And I saw some were probably using a little bit of Lumion and things like that. Again, trying to gain control over Lumion, I think or Enscape or V-Ray or there's Maxwell. There's plenty of them, right? Third-party renderers. Again, whatever you feel works best for you. Right? This is a chance for you to experiment. In fact, you had a whole week and a half to experiment, right? And figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. Now we have to that was the divergent part. Now the convergent part. I see a draft. Let's make that draft better so that it works for a final submission, right? Okay, so here we go. Let's say for some reason this thing is showing up, or one of these wall panels or something are showing up differently, maybe different color, or we want to set a particular shader for it. Okay. And so if I just go to the render pull down, you can see that there should be like render settings, render properties, right? Let's see here. Where is the... I'm just looking for something really simple here, and it's this paint tube, right? For whatever reason, my materials palette, which I usually have docked over here, right? Here we go. Is on, right? So you look for this sort of skeuomorphism, right? This idea that we make this sort of analog metaphor for a digital tool. So in this case, they used a paint tube talking about materials and colors. Right? So if I click there, you can see that currently I have no materials out of this model. I can, of course, add some if I'd like by clicking the little plus sign. And I can import from material library. You can see that there's already some presets here. I think by default, it just has a generic sort of white plaster material. We should call that white clay model material, right? Just there's no shaders, there's no real color added. It's just sort of surface and then a pure sort of blank white surfaces to be painted with shade and light. But if I go to import from material library, you can see that there are a number of options at your disposal. And plus, you can always download these and look it up and go, like Google search free shaders for Rhino, or free shaders for 3D Studio Max, or free shaders for SketchUp, or free shaders for Lumion, or free shaders for Revit, or whatever it is. Right, so if I can go to architectural, then suddenly you see that I have ceiling, exterior, floor, roof, wall. Let's see what kinds of things. I have brick, CMU, concrete, masonry, siding, stucco, so more things that I can take a stick at. Even if I just go into, let's say, tile, you can see that I have tons of different examples, right? So part of this is just, again, understanding what's at your disposal here. Let me just start with a really kind of dumb, basic one. But I'll just go with the plaster. In this case, I'll actually give it a color other than white. Maybe, sometime today, hopefully. So you can see that I have basically now a new plaster material in my model, and I can again change. In this case, all you're doing is changing a few settings like color. So that could be really handy if you're doing some sort of specific color scheme for diagrams and things like that. I'm thinking like exploded axon showing program distribution. Maybe you have pink over here, and that's kitchen, and blue is circulation or whatever it is, right? So, but what I can also do is I can start to pick different ones. Plus, I also have physically based materials from texture files. Let's look and see what they have there. Environments. Nothing in environments. Let's see, architectural. Let's go with, well, who knows? I'll go with wood. No, I guess. Oh, I see. Never mind. It needs, let me just back up. Let's just go import from material library. I'll just get something silly here. Let's say architectural. I'll do wall, I'll do tile. Let's see. Now I have to pick a certain tile. Tile thin gray. Let's try tile thin gray. See what that looks like. Okay. So you can see when I have a more sophisticated shader, I start to get more settings I can play around with. Right? So I can get things like roughness and opacity. It has a map, right? It basically has an image that it sort of tiles through, or some sort of texture that it tiles through. Sometimes when we go to displacement maps, like as it starts to map the image on, it also looks at the grayscale values on that image and it starts to distort the geometry. That it actually, the geometry conforms to the actual map. So you can see that there's more here than you probably knew about if this is their first time picking up Rhino. What I can do is I can select an object, and I can right-click on the material and say assign to the object that's selected, and let's see what it looks like when I turn that on. It might look great, it might look terrible, I don't know. I haven't really used whatever this shader is, but we're going to find out. I see, I'm picky. I'm like a shader snob. No, not terrible. But there's other things we can do here. We can also talk about the scale of this, and then also its rotation, how it begins to tile. And let's see, roughness is set all the way up. Opacity set all the way up. So you can begin to play around with these things as you like, right? Now, that might be one rabbit hole some of you want to go down, and probably a rabbit hole that some of you don't, right? I mean, like, I don't like doing a lot of stuff with shaders, and especially with Rhino. I mean, like, I came from the days where, like, rendering something halfway sophisticated back in the late 90s meant setting up to render and then come back and say, okay, come back in 72 hours. And you lock the computer and open the power cable in the computer lab, and you get on the computer next to it and try that one as well, and get it from it and render in another one. So you would measure those things in days and hours and days, or seconds and minutes, right? So you guys have great, trust me. If it's taking you a long time to render, let me know. There might be some settings we can tweak and adjust to really take advantage of the computational prowess that laptops have these days. But if I just zoom in on this, it's not terrible, it's not great. Maybe it's my ground plane, I'm not sure. But you can begin to add these sorts of materials and shaders. Right? You can always click on these, and if for some reason this is rendering a chartreuse, you can then make that white plaster or whatever you want it to be, right? And then set it to assign it to that object. Yeah. Are you sure? I accidentally selected it and then right-clicked and hit it. Yeah, come on. Yes, I'm sure. Now that it'll remember the history of that material is linked to that geometry or whatever the geometries that you've assigned that shader to. So if I come back later and change the color, for instance, that shader, then everything that's set to that shader will change with it, right? So but that's what I mean, right? Like if you want this to be really bright color, okay, but if not, then there are ways to sort of tweak that. You don't have to worry about that. Now let's go into Photoshop and let's talk a little bit about how we can more easily sometimes sorry, my brain feels like it's not working at the moment, right? Like here we have an issue where I have a wall behind my diagram. So if I were to change the color of this wall in Photoshop, I also need to start selecting all the little individual metric spaces inside my diagram to do that. It's not that easy to do, and what I'd recommend first is thinking about, is that something I can solve at the shader level before I render and bring this out, right? That's one option. Or let's see, what else? Or do I purposely make one of these things, either the foreground parts, the diagram, or the background part, that panel, purposely different, right? So that the contrast I can then use as a selection strategy, right? So let's talk about what I just said, selection strategies, because I think that's really important. Let's look over this guy's shoulder really quickly. In fact, I'll just turn him off for a minute. Turn off some of these people here. Blink, get them out of the way. Right, and so there's a couple of things here to sort of keep in mind, right? If, let's say I made that panel back there dark, then what I could do is I can start to select by color and start to select all the dark spots in between, right? Now, this is so close to that, I probably can't do that, right? So let's talk about this just a little bit, and let's look at our selection options. First of all, if I click and hold drag, right, I have a freehand lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool. I like the polygonal one. And what I can do is I can say, let's just select one region each time. So if I start a new region and deselect the old stuff, or I can just keep adding and adding and adding more and more regions that I've selected to the same selection. Or I can subtract, etc. Right? So I'm just going to set this right now. And I could literally go through here and start to very carefully start to select each polygon. And that one, and that one, and that one, right? Now, that's kind of painstaking for my part. Like I see lots of different triangles. I probably start to miss things, right? Let's say I did that though. Let's say I wanted to keep all of that. Let's see here. I can go to paths, see layers, channels, paths. I can say paths, and I could say make work path from selection. And then later on, let's say I'm doing something else. I can go back to layers here and I'll just pick one. I can go back to my paths and I can say, let's take that work path and let's load the selection now from it again. So that's one way you can begin to save these things, right? And I think it's very handy in order to be able to do that, particularly to sort of save your selections. If you go to this painstaking process of sort of finding all these regions, right, you can save them that way. But of course, there are other ways as well. Let me just take this a little further here. Let me turn off some of this stuff. A lot of stuff here to turn off. Ay, ay, ay. All right, back to the original rendering. Let's say I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. Yep. I'm going to move it all the way to the top. right? And then I'll turn this layer on. I'll duplicate this one. Yep. Oh, come on. Sorry, what I'm just going to do is flatten these things out and talk a little bit about how you can start to selectively get different regions here. All right, so let's say I'll just flatten, let's see, merge these layers. All right. So let's say I do want to get some of this blue sky out of here, right? That's a lot of little tiny things I have to start to draw around. No. I could, of course, use the magic wand tool and tell it that I want to select out all the sort of contiguous things that are blue, right? So, in that case, I'm sort of saying, let's select that one and that one and that one. Oh, sorry, I gotta set it to this. That one and that one and that one, right? So I can go through and just select all the blue, right? If I wanted to select literally all the blue in the entire scene, there's even another way to do this. I can go to select, pull down, and select by color range, and it gives me a little eyedropper tool. And I can tell how sensitive or not I want it to be to blues, and then I select everything that's blue, right, within a particular tolerance from that original blue. Then from there, I can start deleting parts of it away, so that whatever I do to the wall behind with the shader can actually show through, right? So there's a couple things to keep in mind. And like I said, sometimes you get to certain ways, and you realize, oh shoot, like I have to make a decision. Do I stick with this path and then start to select things one by one, or do I take a few steps backwards, republish something out, but with a strategy for how to sort of put things back in, between foreground and midground, or midground and background surfaces, right? So anyway, just a few things to keep in mind. Those are some of the things that I noticed, right? Just offhand when I was looking at some of these great first drafts that you guys submitted, most of you submitted. All right. Okay, so there's the demonstration from the other day. But again, a lot of you are well on your way to something really interesting. So I think one of the keys is to simply say, okay, how do I spend time now between the next week, right? Realizing that you're going to budget probably some time for the rest of this session, and then Wednesday, then you need a little bit of time budgeted between Wednesday and Monday over the whole weekend to get the final project submission.
Or not Wednesday?
Not Monday.
Oh, I thought you said Wednesday.
So, does that make sense?
So we have the weekend to change our drawings.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point in trying to start Wednesday and then saying, see you guys 5 days from now, right? Like, I like sort of start something on Monday, reinforce it on Wednesday, let you guys have the longer weekend to sort of figure things out, come back on Monday, answer questions, start it again, Wednesday, reinforce it. Does that make sense? That cadence seems to work really well since we only meet twice a week. Just fine by me. All right, so like I said, here's the schedule. Again, it mentions ortho drawings on here. It should be relatively straightforward to export DWGs of your plans and sections from Revit, so I'm not really interested in seeing those. Okay? What I do want to see, focus on those two perspectives, exterior perspective and interior perspective. Okay? Some of you have given me very specific feedback, like, I need to rethink, this shader, or whatever. Some of you, I gave you like some blanket comments, like the exterior perspective, you need to rethink that entirely, right? Let's go back to first principles and reevaluate where you're standing and what you're looking at, and then re-render, and then start to bring that into Photoshop and collage. So take a look at the feedback if I gave you some, right? And now we can do some, I can float around for the last half an hour of class. It's work time. And while that's going,